Well, hello and welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. And as you see, we have a slightly contrived array of vehicles here this time round. And there is a reason for that, because this is a very personal video for me, actually. It's about one man and his genius and his legacy. And that is the very humble and great Marcello Gandini, the Italian stylist, who was one of the most prolific car designers, if not the most prolific, of the 20th century and into the 21st. But he designed all sorts of things, and it's a very personal story for me. I've met him and been invited to his house and his premises, his home, which is wonderful. But the journey started for me when I was sort of 8 years old, and in those days we had a very clunky old TV. It was just after the Edison phonograph had been invented, and the ability to transmit sound and picture. So we had a TV, a clunky old TV in the house, and I watched the Italian Job movie, and I was captivated by this amazing orange car driving around the mountains with Matt Monro singing his song over the top of it. And this was just, it might as well have been from another planet. This terribly exotic Italian high-altitude landscape with this terribly exotic car blasting round it, and that sowed a seed in my mind. Then when I was 12 years old, I had an experience with a Lamborghini driving past the home in the summer where the window was open, and that for me, hearing a V12 for the first time ever, a Lamborghini V12, it sent tingles down my spine, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. It was an Espada, more of which later. Here is an Espada, cunningly disguised as an Espada, standing next to me. It was just, it just set me off on a trajectory, and I spent my teens, misspent my teens probably, studying. I wanted to be a car designer, and I've never shared these sketches with anybody, really, but I'm going to share some sketches now. I had this very Tyrrellesque thing about 6 wheels that I went through. I did A-level art. Some of these drawings were for my A-level art project. And I sort of aspired to be a car designer. Marcello Gandini, as such, wasn't even in my consciousness then. The Espada was, the Countach was, the Miura was, but I didn't realize that he was one of the common denominators. And I bought a book. I actually have built up quite a big library of automotive works over my life. And I bought a book when I was about 17. And this is it. This lovely publication here, which, as I say, I got when I was about 17 or 18. This is quite a well-known book now, which is worth money on its own. But when I went on my trip to Italy to visit Mr. Gianpaolo Dallara, the person who developed the mechanicals of this car, he was the chief engineer at Lamborghini and all the other cars in the early days, and then went on to visit Mr. Gandini. Look, they both gave me lovely messages in the book from them personally. Absolutely fabulous. I never thought I'd see the day when I was in my teens, doodling away on my sketch pad and then fixing the little Mini that my dad bought for me for £50 when I was 16. Little did I know that one day I would meet my heroes. So, I mean, just an amazing experience. I can't put into words, and I have to thank my good friend and Lamborghini authority, Olivier Nemesh, for facilitating me meeting these people. So, this begs the question: what has do all these 3 cars and that one behind? What do they have in common? Well, they were all styled by Marcello Gandini. Even the Renault, this is the Renault Magnum. Believe it or not, Renault called it the aerodynamic when it first came out. Can you believe it? Must have been somebody, they must have had a little something too much, I think, in the Renault marketing department. But be that as it may, it was called the Renault Aerodynamic, but it was designed by Marcello Gandini, as were so many other vehicles and things like that. I got invited to, through the good offices of Olivier, he invited me to drive to his house with a Miura, which is what I did with the Italian job Miura after we'd authenticated it as the car from the movie. That's a whole other story which you can see in some back catalogue of videos on this channel. The result was that I got invited to Marcello Gandini's house. I spent a beautiful afternoon with him, interviewing him personally through an interpreter, and then he invited me into his sanctuary, his studio, and I spent some time there. The whole thing was just magical, and he told me firsthand how he designed the Miura. And in fact, we have the original concept Miura here. This is an S, but it's basically an updated P400, the original model. And then we have an SV, which is in another video at the back there, which will feature at some point in the near future. But he did share with me that the reason why he styled the Miura the way he did was because the tyre technology at the time, Pirelli, who were on the cutting edge of tyre technology, couldn't come up with a wide, low-profile tyre yet until 1971, when the 1970-71, when they started to experiment with other concepts, low-profile concepts, which of course we take for granted these days. A family saloon has more profile tyres on it than this 1960s supercar from then. So anyway, we're going to have just a look at this truck behind, because strangely enough, it's not something we've ever had in the workshop, is a great big Renault truck. We've actually got, including this, we've got 14 vehicles in the business at the moment for work or for sale, mainly work. That were all styled by my hero, Marcello Gandini. It's just, I have to pinch myself that I'm in this position. Little did I know when I bought that book as a teenager that I would meet my heroes, that all this amazing, fantastic Italian landscape and personalities would become real to me firsthand. Things have come full circle. I've spent my professional career tuning and working on these wonderful masterpieces, almost all Lamborghini-wise, styled by Marcello Gandini. Let's go and have a look at the Renault Magnum truck. I mean, one of the amazing things about this is that I think it was quite revolutionary at the time. I am not a truck expert, but that the cab was actually suspended on 4 airbags, one in each corner, to help with comfort. And apparently that was a bit of a double-edged sword, according to experts I've spoken to. Some people like it, some people don't. But you can actually get hold of the cab and move the whole thing. And I think this was his design for creature comforts of the time, but it's an amazing shape. As a truck design, it is unique. I think back to the 70s designs of that crazy designer Luigi Colliani, who came up with all sorts of things. That's for another video and another time. But let's see if we can get into the cab of this thing. First of all, find the door handle. Ah, yes. Not used to seeing the workshop from this height, but an amazingly roomy thing. And one of the things is, I mean, this thing is huge. And I think it was one of the first tractor cabs that you can actually, it's got a flat floor, you can actually stand up in it. I'm just on 6 foot, and I can stand tall in this and walk around it freely. an amazing piece of machinery in its own right, and they're worth next to nothing now, these Renault Magnums, but they're actually developing a cult following all of their own because of their styling and their way outiness. But Marcello Gandini's influence extends to so many things that are in our everyday subconsciousness, for want of a better way of putting it. His wheel arch design that was used on the first Countach, the LP400, where it slopes up towards the back of the wheel arch and then tumbles home down underneath the car. Amazing styling cues. And you drive along a highway or a freeway or a motorway now, and you will see lorries and coaches everywhere with Marcello Gandini wheel arch design. They've taken it lock, stock and barrel and incorporated it into their designs because it's so funky and because it's so cool. So actually we can hardly drive along a road without seeing a Marcello Gandini influenced or first-hand design. It's not just the Italian exotics, amazing though they are. This was the genius of the man. This was the cleverness. Well, I do want to say a huge thank you to Cameron and the guys at Sotrex for really being good sports and bringing this rather large prop, this truck over specially. Thank you very much. Well, of all the cars in the world, the Espada has a special place in my heart. And that's because in my hometown of Wallasey in the northwest of England, there was a blue metallic Espada, Tahiti blue Espada, that was owned by a chap very local to my family home with my parents. And in the summer of 1975, when I was 12, I heard the most amazing noise driving past our bathroom window. It was a blazing hot summer. The bathroom window was open, and I heard this amazing noise passing the window, and I thought, what is that? Looked out of the window, and it was this blue metallic Espada, which of course was styled by Marcello Gandini. So the stamp was made, the imprint was made into my memory at the age of 12, that this amazing looking, radical looking car, which a bit like the Countach still looks like a spaceship basically, was driving around Wallasey. We only brought it out very occasionally in the summer on dry days, as most Italian car owners do. The engine, I mean, basically everything that has been my life around these cars, engines, styling, being up close and personal with so many of these machines over the last 40 years has been because of that encounter with that Espada when I was 12. So the Espada for me has got a real place in my heart. I went on to actually own that car. I bought it from him. It came in for work to my first business, Tyrrell Engineering, 3 or 4 years later. So the thing came full circle. And I had lots of years of enjoyment cherishing and driving that car. Had some wonderful trips in it, road trips, etc. But the Espada is an amazing piece of packaging. It's one of the most, I'll say this, one of the most brilliantly packaged cars ever made. There is hardly any space that is not used inside an Espada. Most cars have got areas of fresh air, compartments hidden behind wheel arches and things like that. But the Espada really is a work of genius. He managed to, from the Marzal, he put conventional doors on this low-slung, wide body. He moved the half Lamborghini engine from the back, resumed the V12 layout as used in the 400 GT, put it in the front. You've got, as I say, this big 4-seater cabin behind, and then luggage space behind that, and big fuel tanks for good range, an air conditioning system integrated into the car. All this in 1968. I think one of the cars that's come closest probably is the Porsche Panamera all those years later. But the Espada, when it was discontinued 10 years later from its launch in 1978, there really wasn't anything around to compete with it. It had carved out its own niche in the market. And in 1968, when it was launched, it was the fastest 4-seater in the world. An amazing piece of engineering and styling. all of course due to Mr. G. And one of the things that Marcello Gandini is known for is the hexagon in styling. He was very into the hexagon as a styling language. In the late 1960s, the Marzal dashboard is covered in a hexagon design. The rear grille on the Miura underneath the bumper is the same hexagon design right the way through to the end of production in 1972-73. And the Series 1 Espadas, again, had a hexagonal dashboard only in the Series 1, which was his fingerprints all over it. He styled that, and the hexagon became a thing with Marcello Gandini, recognizable as one of his trademarks. Well, the car that really started for me and for many people the journey with Marcello Gandini was the Miura. There's been various bits of conjecture over the years as to who designed all the details of the Miura, but I think I'm going to give Marcello Gandini all the credit, because I've actually met the gentleman and he's actually explained to me firsthand how he designed various components of the car. Far be it from me to contest a person of that stature's word on anything. So where I had the privilege of, through Olivier Nemesh, of being invited to Mr. Gandini's house, an old monastery on a plateau overlooking Turin and Mont Blanc, as you do. And he invited me to his house. I took along the Italian job Miura, which happened to be in Italy at the time, which we had just finished certifying and authenticating as the car from the movie. One of the most iconic movie cars of all time. And I had the pleasure of taking that car to his house, and he, as I say, explained to me firsthand how he designed the Miura, which was wonderful. I never ever in my wildest dreams thought I would be in that situation. Just amazing. And so the Miura speaks for itself. It is what it is, as they say. I was invited to his home and his studio, and here is some previously unseen footage of me actually visiting his studio. Oh, wow. This is a serious drawing board.
Sì, solo che oramai non li usa più nessuno questi, però io li continuo a tenerli perché...
Is this like a Diablo?
Diablo è un piccolo restyling della Diablo che poi non è stato fatto. È un restyling a basso costo, nel senso che tutta la parte centrale è sempre quella della Diablo, cambiando solo il muso e la coda. Il modello a grandezza naturale è la Lamborghini del museo.
May I ask, if you think back to the design of the Miura, what was the process from you taking from your original drawing to the first production car? What was the process? What happened?
Beh, diciamo che il procedimento per passare dal disegnino al prototipo anche funzionante è più o meno sempre lo stesso per tutte le macchine. Una volta si presentavano ai saloni dei prototipi fatti perfettamente, fatti in alluminio, erano quasi delle macchine di serie. Oggi invece si presentano dei modelli finti statici, costano molto meno bello da fare come tipo di lavoro. Poi magari posso dire ancora qualcosa sul procedimento, ma lasciamo solo il tempo. Sì, diciamo nel caso della Miura il procedimento era ancora quello classico degli anni 60, cioè dai primi disegnini disegnavo un disegno, diciamo il piano di forma cosiddetto, cioè in scala 1:1 con tutte le sezioni eccetera, che serviva ai modellisti per tagliare tutte le sezioni di legno e costruire un modello sul quale sarebbe stata battuta poi la lamiera, l'alluminio. Oggi è cambiato un po' solo per il fatto che dai primi disegnini poi si lavora col computer, soprattutto invece di fare un grande piano di forma si fa un piccolo dischetto che serve per fresare il modello su cui poi viene fatto il resto del lavoro. Ma, diciamo che una volta non si faceva neanche il modello in scala ridotta, tipo quello, perché disegnando in grandezza naturale con tutte le sezioni si vede già quasi il modello fatto, è molto facile da valutare. Cosa che non esiste più invece col computer, nel senso che è molto difficile valutare sul computer che non ha dimensioni, no? Non c'è una scala e quindi è molto difficile. E poi si è sempre un po' tratti in inganno dalle possibilità del computer di far girare la macchina, vederle in tutte le cose, non si capisce niente.
Is it true that you did a 1/8 scale model first of the Miura?
Neanche della Marcello, neanche dell'Espada, è stato fatto per la Carabo, quella che
la Carabo.
nel 68. Lì è stato fatto un modello in scala. Forse è la prima volta che ho fatto un modello in scala, in quell'occasione. Poi è stato fatto per la Countach, ma è stato fatto perché volevo provare la Galleria del Vento allora.
When is this drawing of the Countach from? When did you draw that?
Ma questo qui è recente perché mi avevano chiesto di fare un disegnino per un personaggio che aveva una raccolta di disegni, un po' di altri stilisti, eccetera. E io gli avevo fatto questa cosa qua. Sì, quello lì era perché, siccome il mio lavoro è meno sui piani di forma grandi, oggi molto meno, e allora tiro fuori un po' di disegni, li appiccico in giro o li faccio perché non sia troppo nudo come Paretti e tutto lì. Sì, in diverse occasioni me l'avevano prestata. Io ho guidato il primo prototipo della Miura che funzionava così. E poi l'ho guidata ancora altre volte, sì. Quella che non ho mai guidato se non per piccolo spostamento è la Countach. Invece ho avuto un'Espada per un po' di tempo, ho avuto anche un incidente, sono stato fuori strada sul ghiaccio, però quasi senza danni, quell'Espada lì e poi quella che è andata al Salone di Ginevra. Ma era stata un'avventura perché era una notte, diciamo, dopo mezzanotte, in un paesino, una strada sperduta, in una curva c'era il ghiaccio e la macchina uscita di strada è andata giù in una specie di burrone così. E sopra c'era mia moglie che era incinta del nostro primo figlio. Vabbè. E non passava nessuno su questa strada di campagna. Allora, io ho fatto a piedi, sono andato fino a una piccola borgata dove da una finestra ho visto c'era della gente che giocava a carte. Allora ho chiesto se potevano aiutarmi, eccetera. Allora sono venuti con un trattore e cercare di tirare su questa Espada però non ce la faceva il trattore perché era troppo. Allora la strada era fatta così con la scarpata da una parte e anche dall'altra. Allora il trattore si è messo in discesa sulla scarpata di là con una corda, hanno tirato sull'Espada e poi siamo andati a casa fortunatamente senza grandi danni.
It wasn't a Lamborghini tractor, was it?
No, non credo.
But in that era, cars were not transported; they were driven.
No, quasi mai. No, per i saloni no, era troppo rischio. Anche se noi mettevamo in condizioni le macchine di camminare perché era bello, all'epoca si poteva entrare nei saloni con la macchina in moto, adesso è vietato, non si può più. E anche la Countach è entrata in moto e anche la Marcello, però non è che funzionassero tanto bene, giusto per entrare nei saloni va bene. Quando avevamo fatto la Marcello ricordo che abbiamo lavorato ancora tutta la notte, eccetera. Il problema era che non funzionava. E il mattino alle 9 c'era il camion che doveva portarla a Ginevra e c'era un certo Bob Wallace che era della Lamborghini che veniva per montare la meccanica. E so che a mezzanotte c'erano tutti gli ingranaggi del cambio sparsi per terra e Bob Wallace che piangeva come un bambino, no? E poi con calma, bene o male, è stata rimontata, però funzionava solo più la seconda marcia e basta, no? Però è stata sufficiente per entrare.
That's called working under pressure.
Sì, è bello, bello perché è un'esperienza molto diversa dal lavoro normale. Cioè, infatti io poi ho rimpianto, l'ho fatto poi ancora un po' di volte, ma nei tempi più recenti non ho mai più lavorato di notte a fare prototipi, salvo un'occasione qualche anno fa. E invece era una cosa molto, molto bella, interessante, perché si crea un'intesa anche con gli operai, con tutti così diversi.
And I believe when the Miura was first driven to Monaco for the Grand Prix in 1966, I believe Bob Wallace did drive the Miura to Monaco, and the clutch, he had to change the clutch release bearing regularly because it wasn't properly developed. But I believe he actually drove it to Monaco.
Ma a Monaco non c'era la Miura, c'era la Marcello, che ha fatto il giro, ha aperto il circuito con il principe Ranieri e Greschelli a fianco.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Once again.
Prego, piacere mio.
Okay. And then we move on to, drum roll required, the Countach. The Miura, of course, was an incredibly hard act to follow, but if ever somebody could knock it out the park, to use the modern vernacular, it was Marcello Gandini with the Countach. It's not even remotely close to the Miura, or there was the Carabo, I think it was, the motor show car, which came before with these scissor doors. But really? In 1971, it still looks like a spaceship now. What's that, 53 years later? I mean, just an incredible piece of equipment, incredible. It's mind-blowing, actually. The funny thing is, you know, when people still see a Countach, you know, they've come into people's consciousness now. They've been around a very long time. But when people see a Countach for the first time, they're sort of still in awe of it, really. It still blows their socks off. Has this just landed from the moon, you know? It's a really amazing piece of virtuoso design, the Countach. I don't know what more I need to say about it, really. Talk about right first time. The later cars obviously developed the wider tyres. The main reason for that was because Pirelli tyre technology went on in the 1970s and increased in sort of cutting edge design. And they came out with the P7, if I'm not mistaken, the first low profile tyre, which Lamborghini immediately translated into the Countach with these wider arches to accommodate them, as opposed to the great big Michelin XWX or Pirelli equivalent tyres, the balloon-shaped tyres that were on the original Countach LP400. And as Marcello Gandini told me personally, when I went to visit him, one of the styling restrictions on the Miura was tyre design, because the tyre, he had to accommodate the shape to make the narrow tyres and wheels look as good as they possibly could. And that's why the early Countaches, the tyres were quite inset into the body, and the later ones, as the technology improved, the footprint became very different, and you had to have these wheel arches, which of course made it look more aggressive as well, if that's possible. And of course we have the legendary shape of the rear wheel arch design. I think that's enough to say about the Countach, really. So much has been said about it over the years. I think we've got 4 or 5 in the workshop at the moment. They are just still jaw-droppingly gorgeous cars. Wonderful. Thank you, Marcello. Well, I'm blowing the lid off a bit of a secret here, really, for the first time, but here is an example of Marcello Gandini's genius. This is a Lamborghini Urraco, the little bull that was conceived by Lamborghini in 1970 and launched in 1971. And when Ferrari came to Bertone in 1973, they had the beautiful, swoopy Dino 246 body shell. And for whatever reason, I don't know whether this came from Enzo Ferrari or whoever else, they decided to go with a boxy Bertone design. Ferrari approached Bertone and said, we want a 2+2, 2 good spacious front seats, two small back seats for kids or whoever, dogs. Italian car-loving dogs, and they, Bertoni, basically what Marcello Gandini did was reskin the Lamborghini Urraco, and it became the Ferrari 308 GT4. And the more you look at it, the more you realize how cleverly this was disguised. So on this car, you've got these creases in the body at these different levels, and on the Ferrari 308 GT4, you didn't have those. It was a crease along there to make the car look different. And on the Lamborghini Urraco, on this one, you have these three big vents that sort of wrap around this area here. Very distinctive vents, a bit like the vents on the back of the Miura engine lid. And on the 308 GT4, this becomes the engine air intake. So you've got a tapered bit going to a hole and a tube in there for the air intake. But it's basically the same. The entire body shell is very, very similar with one big difference. And that's not visible unless you're really in the know, for want of a better way of putting it. This is a monocoque unitary construction body shell, so it doesn't have a separate chassis frame. It has a floor made up of pressings and all welded together to form one structural unit. Whereas the Ferrari 308, the body shell actually stops here, and the whole inside of the car is mounted on a chassis frame going right back to the Dino 246 and right forward until the F40 in the 80s and just into the 90s. And the Ferrari 308 body was actually dropped onto the chassis frame, and we've done some work on 308 GTBs and GT4s, so we can show the difference. And this one is actually it's steel. The floor is steel on the 308 GT4. Same car effectively. The whole of the inside is a fiberglass molding. It's a fiberglass floor, and the whole thing is dropped onto a chassis frame, as I say. Different philosophies of the different car manufacturers, but who'd have thought that a Lamborghini and a Ferrari, fierce rivals at the time, would have actually been styled by the same, actually had this almost the same underpinnings. Very interesting. So yeah, let's move on. Amongst the many designs that he has produced, one of them is the BMW 5 Series, the original BMW 5 Series that BMW really got their act together in the late 60s and early 70s. They became a tour de force after various lives before that, and under the new regime, they came up with the 5 Series, sort of Mercedes E-Class rival as it now is, or was for many decades. 1972, Marcello Gandini got approached to design the BMW 5 Series, which rather cleverly became the Maserati Quattroporte 3, I think, from memory, or 2. And that looked, again, remarkably like the BMW 5 Series. He copied and pasted very cleverly. And then we move on to 1973, another one of his amazing, rather more rarefied designs was the Lancia Stratos, which became a very successful rally car with Ferrari Dino 246 mechanicals, the V6 engine. The Lancia Stratos, again, was a stunning looking car with that beautiful swept windscreen design going into the door windows. And then we move on to, I mean, there's so many cars along the way, but what I'm trying to express here is the breadth and width and height and depth of his reach, really. We get the Renault, the Citroën BX in 1982. I mean, how many BXs were there in Europe in the 1980s and the UK? I mean, every fifth car was a Citroën BX in France, seemingly, in the 1980s. Then 1984, Renault decided the 5 needed, they need to up the ante with that, bring out a new model, the Super 5, as it was called, the Super 5. It was squatter, it was meaner, it was wider, it became the GT Turbo, which was a great car. I actually owned one for some years, a Series 2 of that shape, and it was brilliant. Guess who designed it? Marcello Gandini. And how many of those were seen on the roads of Europe and beyond? Unwittingly, we could hardly look anywhere. We didn't have to dig deep into the treasure chest of exotica to look very far for Marcello Gandini's sphere of influence and design language. It was all around us. It was all around us, literally. And everyone was different. This was his genius. The Countach was incredibly different from the Miura, which was incredibly different from the Stratos, etc. Very, very interesting. But what is really the judge of a prolifically talented and wide-ranging designer? It's the legacy that he has left behind for us to appreciate and subliminally absorb for years and years to come. I'll give you two examples. One of them is the hexagon. He was the person who came up with the hexagon design styling element. Okay, it was very hexagon heavy in the late 60s, and the Lamborghini Espada Series 1 dashboard was very hexagonal in concept, following on from his design of the Marcello Lamborghini in 1967, which was Leonard Setwright, the famous journalist, motoring journalist, described it as perhaps the most prolific piece of virtuoso styling since the war. That was what Leonard Setwright said when he saw the Lamborghini Marcello. And it was so avant-garde that when Bertoni, which of course Marcello Gandini worked for, when Nuccio Bertoni showed it, unveiled it to Ferruccio Lamborghini, apparently Ferruccio Lamborghini physically shuddered. And he thought, what have I done? Is this one of my babies? And the Marcello was totally out there. It was a full four-seater with massive gull-wing doors. In fact, the car was so big, they could only squeeze half the Miura V12 engine in the back. So it's a very big car. It was actually the predecessor to the Espada. They made a prototype Espada with the gull-wing doors, but it never made it to production due to technical difficulties. The demands of an everyday car are different from a show car. But what they ended up doing was putting a 2-litre, 6-cylinder engine in the back of the Marcello because there was no room for such fripperies as engines anywhere else in the design. It was an amazing piece of engineering. It still survives to this day. It's been restored and is in a European collection, the Marcello. But that was the harbinger for the likes of the Countach and all those absolutely avant-garde designs that came later. His legacy, the hexagon, and secondly, his wheel arch, his Countach wheel arch, that rising at the back and sloping down towards the front. If you're driving on a highway or a motorway or a road and you're passing trucks and coaches, you will see Marcello Gandini's wheel arch profile on a lot of those vehicles because it was a major styling cue. It went away from the boring sort of round or square with rounded wheel arches that so many cars have got. He thought out of the box, he came up with this concept, and if you look closely, you can see it almost everywhere, the sloping wheel arch. I'm not saying he was the first, I think he was, but maybe somebody somewhere else did it before him, but that's one of his enduring styling cues. Well, that concludes another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. Hope you've enjoyed it. Please do subscribe and like, it helps. And we'll be back with something else very soon.